Imagine yourself in the late 1980s. You're in Chicago. The city's basketball scene wasn't yet dominated by the iconic Bulls of the 90s. Back then, Michael Jordan was a budding superstar. He was super well known. He had his shoes out and he was already making waves. But the team as a whole hadn't yet reached its full potential. And despite Jordan's brilliance, the Bulls had not yet clinched an NBA championship. In fact, the head coach who took the Bulls from not being a good team to being the world's greatest team, Phil Jackson, he is the man who, in fact, helped work with Jordan to turn the Bulls around. And he writes in his book, 11 Rings, that they were at a moment of truth. He says, we were at a moment of truth for the Bulls because for the past 6 years, we've been struggling to create a team around Michael Jordan, and now we had the talent in place to win a championship, but there was an important piece missing. In a word, the Bulls needed to become a tribe. I love that because as business owners, as leaders, we think it's all about getting the right people. Well, if we can just recruit the right people, if we can just make it happen, we will grow, right? It's guaranteed. Only you and I know it's not guaranteed. It's never guaranteed. And so Phil Jackson, the legendary coach of the Bulls, was facing the same challenge that you and I face as people managers. We had to figure out how to move from a Jordan-centric team, the team that has the A player where everything is on their shoulders, to creating a team, a tribe-centered team. And now he did this in a few different ways. Jackson was able to foster an environment where it was really about the mutual respect and a collective goal because they all knew that they could win games with Jordan, but they could not win a championship with Jordan alone. Now, I share that story with you because today we're talking about ways employers can not only hire the top sales talent, the top employees, but also bring everyone together to be able to create the team that's not just going to win games, but win championships. Now, today's guest, Billy Stein, is not only an experienced salesperson and sales manager who has spent the last 10, 15 years working his way up in B2B sales. He's also the host of the Sales RX podcast. But more interesting than that, just before the recording of this episode, he was downsized out of his company. And so, as you're going to hear, we actually spent less time talking about sales strategies and marketing strategies and growth strategies, and we spent more time talking about what does it take for employers to create an environment and a team that talent want to work at. What would it take for you or for I to create the environment, the management, the training, and the opportunities for these top salespeople to want to come and work for us? And I found the conversation completely fascinating. So I want to welcome you to How to Sell More, the sales podcast for non-sales people, where each week we give a masterclass for ambitious B2B leaders just like you. I'm Mark Drager. Let's get into it. So Billy Stein, I have listed here that you're the regional vice president of sales, but that was your previous company because you were just telling me before we hit record that you have actually moved on to a new company, to a new role, and this is not the first time it's happened to you in this economy. What is going on?
Unfortunately not. I don't know how I would tell my 30-year-old self that at a certain point, your role at a company is going to be more focused on tenure than merit. But
is that what's happening? Because I've been an entrepreneur for far too long. And so so whenever I have the chance to connect with people in corporate, on large sales teams, even people in startups that are maybe VC backed, it's a very different vibe than those who might be full-time entrepreneurs, who may be part of a small or medium-sized team in a fairly conventional industry, or someone who works for a large corporate 500 company in maybe a department that's more sales or marketing driven and a little bit more stable. What is happening right now?
Well, I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I want to start out by saying I was at an amazing company called Seismic until very recently, and I would tell anybody who will listen, like that company gave me a lot more than they took from me at any point. I have had a little bit of time to think about it, and I kind of have it distilled down like this. I mean, I think a lot of companies took a lot of bets some years ago, and the astute listeners, anybody who pays attention, has probably read many articles or watched a lot of videos where somebody talks about decisions made post-pandemic when money was cheap and growth was the only option. I think everything's kind of come to a bubble, right? And a lot of people, especially at the company I was most recently at, a lot of people who I have a lot of respect for had to make some very difficult decisions. And when you think about the actual root economics behind keeping somebody on board or casting somebody aside, there is a cost of doing business with that. And for me, when I compare myself to some of my peers, like they just had a lot more tenure at the company than I did. And that costs the company a lot more out the door than releasing somebody who's newer at the company. So, and I don't think I'm alone. I talked to a lot of people who have been dealing with this in the last 18 to 24 months. I've had to deal with it twice now. The hardest part about this whole thing is in a healthy economy, people are going to let bottom performers go or business units that aren't really producing as much as the investment goes into them. But, it's not always a merit-based thing. And this industry we're in, if you're in technology, I'm in technology. When it's good to us, it's really, really good to us. And when it's not so good, it doesn't always love us back. So this is kind of the recourse as a result.
And so I find this super fascinating because I obviously think more from the manager or the employer side of things.
Yeah.
And I think what a fantastic opportunity for those of us who have budget, who have growth plans, who are able to onboard more people, because there's this massive influx of great talent on the market right now looking for people. And sure, you might snatch someone up, and then maybe if the economy changes or if industries change, maybe they might choose to bounce. But I just saw come across my LinkedIn profile the other day, someone we've had on this podcast, someone we have profiled, someone who I deeply respect, just post that like, hey, I'm open to new opportunities. And I'm thinking, that person is open to new opportunities. How do I get them in my firm?
I know it.
So, maybe I'm just too opportunity focused, but I look at this like, what a great opportunity. Is that how it feels on the employee side, or is it very different?
No, quite the opposite. Maybe it feels great if you're hiring, but I look at mine too. And one of the things that from a very early age, I feel like I had very good mentors that gave me a lot of good direction on was shake a lot of hands, get to know a lot of people. You flash forward that into like the post-pandemic world where like our LinkedIn has become, it's evolved like to a new form of social media more powerful than some of the other ones that we may use on a daily basis. I look at my network and there are people that are just head scratchers that are part of the Green Banner Committee right now. And it's wild, but no, it definitely doesn't feel like a great opportunity. And like, if you're on the other end of that, you're on the other end of the line. And like, I think a lot of people saw that Cloudflare video with Brittany Peach, who recorded her layoff video. To say the rug gets ripped out from underneath you is like an understatement, right? Like you start to question everything. And especially in my case, I'm no spring chicken anymore. I'm in my mid 30s, which by tech standards, I guess makes me pretty old. Not ADA old, but I've got some gray hairs on my face and I've seen a lot of things. I feel like I build this great pedigree and like, one day everything is great and you're celebrating wins. And then the next day, oh my God, like, what do I do now? And that's really the stark reality of what happens. Like you get that news and it's like, crap, I haven't updated my resume since, the last time I had to do this. Interviewing is not a skill too many people ever really think about getting good at. How do you find jobs? Like, how do you figure it out? How do you crack the code? Your thoughts, they start to spin and everything gets very scattered. So it's quite the opposite feeling if you're on the employee side compared to the employer side, especially knowing how many other good candidates who also have big networks there are that you're competing with for space.
That is challenging. I mean, I think we've all experienced that in different levels. Our business had a really massive shakeup because of the pandemic. We lost 70% of our revenue in one day, March 12th, 2020. We lost 70% of our revenue in a single day. And that was very, very challenging. And I found myself asking many of the similar questions. So I don't think it's unique just to employees. I think it's unique to anyone who has something outside of their control come up. When you have an idea, when you have a plan, when you know where you're going, when you know what you're doing, at least you feel like you do. You have a certain amount of certainty. And when your world gets rocked, you can have a habit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You could start to question everything. You could start to pull on that thread, and suddenly, like the Weezer song, your sweater's left undone. But as you filtered through that, did you arrive at any kind of conclusions? Were you able to parse through and filter through, okay, this is actually the critical objective truth of what I'm facing, and these are the critical objective truths of my skills, and these are the objective truths of maybe where I'm not as competitive as maybe I should be? Like, how did you manage that?
Yeah, my older brother lives right down the street from me here in Los Angeles, and he works in the entertainment industry. And he tells me all the time, you're not just tech sales. Like, if there's something more you want, go do it. And if he listens to this, he's gonna have a proper laugh over it. But pretty quickly on, I mean, when you go through that experience, you confide in the people you're comfortable confiding with, and you let them know what happened. And if you have done favors for people in the past, like, that's when you start thinking about, like, who could I call in for a favor? Or if I don't have a favor to ask somebody, who would just help me to help me? And I knew, after talking to everybody on my team about it after, I mean, I know who I am. I know I'm a tech sales guy all the way, and I love managing teams of sellers. So nothing really changed there. It was just about, okay, what team can I lead? What technology can I sell? What brand can I be a steward of? And it was just about, not feeling like a victim, not throwing a pity party, but just hitting the ground running and finding the next thing.
How long did that turnaround take? And then when you decided to find that next thing, how did you, and again, remember, I'm looking for the cheat code here. The manager, the employer. I'm like, how do I position, how do we position for our clients or for our firm to employees? Because recruitment branding, it's still a competitive space. Like, even if there's this influx of talent on the market, I still want the best of the best. I want people to come in with the right value set. I want people to have a background and understanding and help me grow or build our sales team, our marketing team, whatever it is we're investing in. So we still want the cream of the crop. How did you look at the next set of opportunities, and what did you value, or how did you place your values in terms of which companies were kind of your A's versus your B's?
Yeah. And I would argue, for what you just said, it's probably even more competitive of a land grab right now for employers to try to find talent, just because there's so much more of it now. And when I looked at it, I first and foremost, you have to look at, what do you want to do? And for me, what I want to do, I want to be a frontline sales manager. They have 1,000 names for them, but somebody who manages a team of sellers and reports up to somebody who runs a business unit of sales. I wanted to do it at a growth stage company. I did not want to go back to a very young startup company. And very important for me, and I knew some of the companies already through my network, and there were others that I knew, if I were going to go in cold anywhere, that this was the top most important thing for me. Is right now, what I'm good at, in my own view, where my strengths are, is that I'm a good frontline manager. I'm an empathetic individual who uses data well, gets to know people, and is results driven. I don't want this forever. I made a joke about my age earlier, but I'm still very young in my career. And, I look up and I'm not knocking at the ceiling just yet. So for me, very specifically, I wanted a company where I could either already know or get to know quickly and get to trust quickly who the leadership was above me, so that they could continue to work on my strengths, polish off some of my rough edges, teach me how to think a little bit bigger, so that I can still grow my career into some of those higher positions up the org chart that hopefully I'm going to achieve later on in my career. So that was really the criteria I was looking at, and I was keeping an open mind. But, somebody, the second day, so the day after, this would have been February 2nd, I went golfing with some friends. And a friend of mine who works at a very large publicly traded company said to me, like, all right, so how's the job search going? I said, well, a couple lines out there, but it's been less than 48 hours. He said, good. I hope you're taking it easy because be honest, have you ever gotten a job from like applying to something on LinkedIn? And I thought about that. I'm like, I don't know if I have or not. He said, of course not. You've either had a recruiter reach out to you or you've gotten referred into every company you've ever worked at, haven't you? And the answer was yes. I've never gotten a job before off of, filling out easy apply on LinkedIn. And that's no offense to easy apply on LinkedIn, but it mattered. So for me, it took me 3 total weeks between layoff day and offer, but it took me really about 4 business days to get in touch with the CRO, who's the CRO of my new company, and kind of get it started. And I didn't have any expectations. I didn't even know I was interviewing with him when I was on the call. I'd have worn a much nicer shirt to that Zoom call. um, but it very quickly, the conversation went from me talking to somebody who I know is extremely well connected in the space and could advocate on my behalf or introduce me to people or even just say like, hey, check out this company you may have never heard of. And, within 30 minutes, it checked all my boxes. So that was it for me.
And so if I were to put together a package, or if I were to be able to invest in certain areas, whether it's CRM and like sales enablement tech, whether it's assets or sales enablement collateral tools, all of the assets that marketing teams seem to forget that sales teams need. They're so focused on the MQL. It's like, hey, why don't we actually give our sales team stuff that they could use to keep the conversations moving forward?
After the MQL, yeah.
Yeah. Marketing teams don't seem to focus on it too much. But if we focused on tech, or if we focused on that, or if we focused on upside potential of earnings, or we focused on like, oh, I don't have to do much bureaucracy, or they have like really great training, or it's a really easy product to understand and sell. Like, tell me as a professional salesperson, how do you rank these things? What's most important to you?
Okay. So number one, no doubt in order, is there has to be a great leader above me. Whether I'm reporting up to a VP, a CRO, a director, whoever, that is my number one priority because as I told you earlier, like I see it as every decision I make in terms of jobs I go to, I want somebody who's going to poke holes in what I do. And that way they can say like, hey, whatever you're doing here, that's a strength of yours. Know it and keep doing it. The same way you'd coach a seller. But I also want them saying like, hey, you're not where you need to be here. Work on it now. Here's how we do it over the next 90 days. So leadership was number one for me. Because I work in technology and because I work generally in the VC space, I do take a look at investors because I want to know that a company is backed by winners who have a history of doing well. Number three, I look at product market fit. This is a big reason why I wouldn't go back to an early stage startup is while I'm working on developing the careers of the members of the team, I don't want to be part of the front line of working on developing the product to fit the market and hopefully be purchased. That is a very valuable skill set where a lot of people can make a ton of money. It's just not it for me. And then beyond that, I am working remotely. I have been working remotely primarily for the last 4 years. It's not a top priority, but I do live in Los Angeles. I would not want to have to commute down to really anywhere outside of about a 5 to 10 mile radius just because rush hour. So the office thing that it didn't really take into effect, but my job search was so short that I didn't have time for that to become a priority. And then I guess tech stack. I mean, I really don't want to have to work off of a desktop computer on dial-up internet with Hotmail.
This is so fascinating. Oh man, this is what I love about this podcast, being able to pick people's brains and just better understand what's important to you. Do you think that what you just shared with us is pretty universal, or is it really like you're cherry picking based on your own unique skill sets?
I think I'm cherry picking a little bit, and here's where it comes from. I think if I'd have met you prior to 2017 when I joined a company called ServiceTitan, then I think my priorities would have been a little bit different. I probably would have said office perks and, free lunches and dogs and all that garbage. But no, I think what's really shaped my experience with it is I went to a company called ServiceTitan that's here out of the Los Angeles area. They're now number 5 on the Cloud 100. I mean, like classic rocket ship. This company I went in, we were doing about 30 million a year in ARR. 4.5 years later, when I walked out, aside from getting what I felt like was 2 decades worth of professional experience, the company had expanded to over 600 million in ARR. And, they've been one of the sweethearts of the IPO scene for a few years now. So I really got to see what that hyper growth can look like. And, I look at that and I look at all the people whose hands I shook and all the people that were in those boardrooms making decisions and all the people that you meet along the way. And, it was a special experience for me. So I wanted to try to replicate it as many times as I could. And I feel like a lot of the companies I pick are doing a lot of the things that ServiceTitan did right in their own right.
I guess what I was wondering is like, and did that happen or did that not happen? Like, were you able to replicate it? Were you able to find it or didn't
I mean,
you?
everybody replicates it to a degree that I've
Okay.
worked alongside. And Soci, the company I'm going to big time, is about to replicate it.
So I know you're the host of your own podcast, the Sales RX podcast, which I find interesting because there's been this huge move to personal branding, right? Like you're doing this podcast and it's not like it's sponsored by, the company you were at or the company you're going to or anything like that. But
Yeah.
I just thought a few years ago where it hit me. I was 15 years into building my agency, and it's my agency. I mean, I'm the owner of it and I created and I launched it, but it hit me to a certain point where it's like I had spent 15 years building up a company and that was tied to my identity. But the company isn't the product. The company isn't the service. The company is just something. It's an asset. It's something I've spent time doing and building. I realized like I'm the product. I'm the asset. I'm the thing that has to keep going once this company is maybe sold or buried or what have you. And so it hit me at a certain point. I was like, oh, I'm actually the product that I need to continually develop, continually invest in, continually shape and have a persona and have a brand and put myself out there, and not in a personal brand type of way, but just simply in terms of life, like this life that I'm living.
Mm-hmm.
As you've, done your podcast, as you've left a few companies, as you've moved into the next company that you've moved into, I have to imagine that you have a very similar feeling about it because, yeah, I mean, your career ended at your last company very suddenly outside of your control.
Right.
But that was just like, it's like my agency. It's a role. It's a company. It's an asset. It's not you. And it's not you for your whole career. And it's not you for the rest of your career. Did you have to make that kind of shift?
I think I can half answer that. You definitely have to, because if you talk to like a wise head, somebody will tell you like you are not your job. You are the person that you choose to be based on the decisions you make and the aspirations you have, right? The reality about that is that, that may be the truth, but a lot of our self-worth is attached to a job. The reason I can only answer that as a half is when I think about the relationship between the work I do and the Sales RX podcast is, part of the reason why I like doing the Sales RX podcast is that it gets me in front of other people like you, Mark, where I get to just talk about work stuff. There's not a chance in hell my wife would let me talk about all the stuff that we're talking about and actually hold her attention. There's no way that, my friends who I hang out with, my golf buddies, would want to talk about any of this stuff, right?
But
when
they
I
must
think
be
about
stupid. I mean, this is like the greatest conversation one could be having, right?
I agree. But when I think about, the podcast, like you talk about branding, like I have done through one season now, the Sales RX podcast is created by Chet Lovegren, my co-host, and he's an ace. That guy doesn't miss. And he's been investing a long time in his brand and he's done a great job of it. And if you look at his reach compared to mine, well, he's much more out there than I am. I never even thought about it from a branding standpoint. I know that's the wrong capitalistic lens to take a look at, but truthfully, I just enjoy doing the podcast because it is a release to talk about the things that I like to talk about as it pertains to work. You had mentioned, though, something interesting, and let's just unpack that too. You had said, like, it's not like your company sponsored your podcast. And very specifically, you're right about that. And I never wanted Seismic to sponsor the podcast, and I wouldn't ask Soci to do it either, because when a company hosts a podcast, then it's not ours anymore. And there was a very specific methodology to the way we would prepare everything, because we didn't want to give away trade secrets. We didn't want to talk about anything that would violate a non-disclosure agreement and lose trust with a customer. Sure as hell wouldn't want to do anything that would alienate and lose trust with my colleagues or my bosses. So that's why we went outside of it and found our own sponsors, so that we had somebody that supported our vision, that was just around, we're two guys talking about work. These are the things that people in our position like to talk about. These are the things that affect us, and here's why we make decisions based on everything. So I hope that clarifies why we didn't do the route, and I certainly would not ask my current employer to do the same either.
No, I think it does. The two dots I was aiming to connect with, at least my line of thinking, is that for anyone who's listening to this right now, and whether you're more like in my position, maybe you're a sales manager, maybe you're a marketing manager, maybe you're a leader, maybe you're an entrepreneur, you're someone in the decision-making seat who is looking to create a stronger team, who's looking to recruit top talent and keep that top talent. Very rarely are we in a situation where we can just pick someone's brain, because it's not the right time in the interview process. In my experience, even if you have a very good relationship with your staff, they will often be open and honest. But at the end of the day, there's still the power dynamic that we have to be aware of.
Yeah.
And so where I was going with it, and the dots was connecting, was that if you are on that side, it's important that we understand how to be more competitive, to build stronger teams, because ultimately, especially in the people-driven businesses that we work with, your people are everything. I mean, people say that, right? Oh, my team is everything. My people is everything. but then they don't seem to realize, like, just how interwoven every aspect of operations and business and recruitment, like every aspect of everything, how interwoven it is. So it's like, I really appreciate you helping me better understand, like, what is important to you. But then on the employee side, on the sales side, on the employee side, I don't know if today your employer is responsible for very much. Like, give people training, give people mentorship, create a great atmosphere, like all of the stuff that I want to do when we build Small Giants, based on the book Small Giants, is there. Like, it seems today that if the economy turns, or there's bad decisions made, people are just going to lay you off, and it's terrible. I don't think it's always right. I think sometimes it's immoral. But that doesn't change the objective nature of the fact that you are now having to figure this out on your own. And so being able to realize that you are the brand, or you are the product, or you are the service, it helped me in my thinking, at least, even as an agency owner, to say, like, oh shit, like I'm gonna outlive this current role of mine. I'm gonna outlive this current thinking. I'm gonna outlive this current iteration of whoever I am. And so I better figure out ways to prepare myself for the future, to prepare myself for whatever's next, but also take more responsibility for, I guess, my own packaging, if that makes sense.
Can I give you a thought on that before we wrap here?
Sure.
Okay, so it's funny. Something you said really struck a chord with me. You talked about, like, it's not really on our employers to do very much apart from, give us our computer and make sure our paycheck comes out on time. But I do think there's a very interesting line of demarcation when I think about every job I've ever had, every leader I've ever had, for better or for worse. And companies don't train people up. Companies really don't invest in people. And you can say, well, a company gives $1,000 learning credit every year. Like, okay, Sure, that is an investment in people, but that's like a lowercase investment. When I think about like all caps investment, like the individuals that I came across that, help push my buttons in a certain way that I saw the world through a different lens of perspective, that always came down to people. And, I think about some of my friends who have come up in like Oracle, ADP, SAP, some of those like very big companies that, or even like, what is it? Enterprise Rental Car Center. Like there are companies where like from day one, you have a 3-year career path and all of the KPIs and all the mile markers are set for you to get to the next position. And it's like, what a luxury to have to think about it that way, right? But I don't think companies don't really do it. And I don't think it's a company's responsibility to do it, because at the end of the day, companies have their outcomes they need to hit. They have whatever the numbers need to be at the end of a certain time frame. And that is what they are responsible for. There's a lot of jokes that go around right now, like, oh, it's about the shareholders. Well, in reality, it is about the shareholders. And unfortunately, as an employee, you have to do your bidding for the shareholders. That is the reality. And if you choose to look at it as a bad thing, like that's your prerogative. But if you choose to look at it for what it is, then you quickly realize something. And what you realize is it's not the companies that actually developed you, it's the individuals. And I look at some of the very best, I still consider myself like in the formative years of my career, and like all the very best leaders I had, all that development time was not the main programming. It was ancillary to whatever the task at hand was. And somebody else took it upon themselves to make me better at what I was doing because they genuinely wanted to make me better. So I don't know if I'm ever going to turn the corner and say like it's indicative of companies to develop their people. I think it's indicative of people to develop people. And whether it's for building up your own company and what you might look for in people that you want to hire to take on key leadership roles, or whether it's for somebody listening that wants to find that next company, when you think about other human beings, like how are you going to benefit from being around this person? I can tell you, I've already, Mark, in 30 minutes we've been sitting down, I realized I need to put some more work into the podcast and like thinking about how we brand that and make it better for our listeners. But, when I look at a company, it's like, I don't expect training is going to happen during normal business hours. I think it's going to happen like when I'm driving somewhere and my boss calls me, says, here's the situation, and says, how do you think about it? And then they say, well, you're 70% correct, but here's a couple things to think about, and here's the knock-on effects of it. I think that's how we should prefer it.
So that was the talk I had with Billy Stein. And to wrap up, I'm going to share my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk. Number 1, the old saying, your network is your net worth. Boy, is that not proven true time and time again? You have to invest time and energy in growing your professional network, because they will not only be there for you on the ride up, but they will be there to help catch you on the fall down. And there's this old saying in Hollywood, I think, where it's like, hey, be nice to people, because the same people who are around you on the ride up will be around you on the ride down. And so you have to spend time investing in your professional network. Number 2, A players want to work with A players. And so if people are coming into your organization and you're looking to recruit the very best, it can't just be all about you, right? It's what's in it for them. And so they want to know that they're working with empathetic and strategic leadership. They want to know that working in your role or in your company is going to be a catalyst for their own innovation, their own career growth, their own learning. And if you can't provide that for them, then you've got to try to do your best, because even though it seems like there's an employer's market out there, I was just talking to a really amazing creative director the other day who had just been let go from a role, and he was looking for new work. And I thought, well, of course he's going to be on the market at least for the next 6 to 8 weeks. No, he was snatched up within 4 days. And so while there's a lot of people on the market, And there are a lot of people looking for work. And if you're one of them and you're listening to this and thinking, I've been at it forever, I'm not saying that to be down on you, but the truth is the people at the top get snatched up right away. And if you as an employer want more of those people, we have to do a better job of creating environments that those A players want to work in, work for, and be a part of. And number 3, what I found most interesting about our entire talk with Billy today was the fact that companies don't train people, people train people. And so if you're a business owner and you're looking at your team and your company, if you're a manager at some level and you're looking at your team and your company, it's really on us. It's on us to do the training, it's on us to do the mentorship, or it's on us to pay for and find the people who are going to provide that for our team. We don't have to do everything, but we are responsible for everything. And so if it's not happening in our companies, it's not happening because we are failing in our responsibility to do it. And listen, I'm not preaching from the mountaintop here. As a visionary CEO, entrepreneur, I really struggle at this stuff. But I made it a point to find great people that I can bring into my company to offer up to my team what I cannot personally do myself. And so there you have it. Those were my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk. I'm curious, what were yours? You agree with me? You disagree with me? You want to get in a fight? I love all of it. Why not head over to LinkedIn? You can find my profile over there. My name is Mark Drager. Go ahead and give me a follow and send me a DM with your biggest takeaway from this talk. Now, while you're over there, be sure to connect with Billy Stein. That's STEIN. And you can also check out his podcast, Sales RX, over on Spotify. Now, one last thing. If you made it this far into the show, you really should subscribe. And now you might be saying like, okay, Mark, I get it. It's your job to try and get more subscribers. But I'm telling you, this is a really good opportunity for you to subscribe right now, because every single week, me and my team work crazy hard to put out the best content we can to help you supercharge your business growth and boost sales. I started off the podcast by saying, hey, this is the sales podcast for non-salespeople. And so if you're in marketing, business development, or a high-level business owner, you really should subscribe. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Mark Drager. I'll catch you in the next episode.